Today we're going to work with external words, phrases, and dependent clauses. There are three safe places to add external words, phrases, and dependent clauses onto a foundational clause. Those three safe places are before the actor, between the actor and the action, or after the answer. So let's do a quick little review. This is a phrase. This is also a phrase. Don't confuse the word wearing with a verb. It's not. In this case, it's called a participle. It's describing the boy. This, of course, would be a clause. It's actually called an independent clause. It has a subject, what we call the actor, the boy wearing the cape, and it has a predicate, what we call the action, arrived. Remember that an independent clause is basically a simple sentence when it's left by itself. It can stand alone as a simple sentence. Remember to always think of Santa Claus. He's got everything he needs to be independent. He's got actors, he's got actions, and sometimes he even has answers. Of course, if we want to get technical, this independent clause, this simple sentence, has a phrase within it, and phrases often exist within clauses. Phrases, however, can never stand alone. And remember, think Santa phrase. He sometimes has actors, he sometimes has actions, and he sometimes has answers, but he never has actors and actions working together. Today we're going to discuss how to add external words and phrases and dependent clauses onto what we're going to call a foundational clause. A foundational clause is quite simply an independent clause that we can build on. It will function as the foundation for a more complicated sentence. Once you start with that foundation, you can add words and phrases and dependent clauses onto it, and that's how you create really cool sentences. Here is an independent clause with an actor, an action, and an answer. It technically has two phrases inside it. The first is the building, and the second is above the city. Now remember, when we're talking about foundational clauses, we're talking about independent clauses, not dependent clauses. Even though all clauses have actors and actions and sometimes answers, dependent ones need help. They can't stand alone because they're not complete thoughts, so they cannot form the foundation of complicated sentences. So remember, when you are trying to build a complicated sentence, you must begin with an independent clause. Of course, that doesn't mean we won't find those dependent clauses inside our independent clauses. Sometimes they can function as the actor, sometimes they can function as the answer, as they do in this example right here. The actor in the dependent clause is it, the action is gets, and the answer is late. The entire clause is functioning as the answer of the sentence, we must leave before it gets late. So let's get back to our foundational clause. The building towered above the city. Not too original, but it will work for our purposes. Now, phrases and dependent clauses that are not part of the foundational clause are considered external. These are set off with commas because they exist outside the syntactic slots of the original foundational clause. Now here's what that might look like if you're adding an external phrase or an external dependent clause to the front of a foundational clause. You begin with your foundational clause and then you add that extra information. But remember, it is technically not part of the foundational clause. It's outside it. It's external. So that's why you set it off with a comma. So as we said earlier, there are three safe places to add your external information. It could be before the actor, between the actor and the action, or after the answer. Today's lesson is all about how to add information before the actor. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to start by adding an additional word to this independent clause. Make sure your word, your external information, describes the part of the foundational clause that is closest to it. In this case, it's the actor, the building. So we're going to add a little personification to our building. And when we plug proudly in front of our foundational clause, we get, proudly the building towered above the city. Now let's add an external phrase to the beginning of our foundational clause. Again, we're still focused on the actor because that's the part of the independent clause that's closest to our external information. So let's try the phrase blotting out the sky. And you put that in front of the building and you get blotting out the sky, comma, the building towered above the city. It might help to remember that a lot of times when external phrases appear before the foundational clause, they often begin with a subordinating conjunction, an ing word, or an ed word. We already saw a phrase that begins with an ing word, blotting out the sky, the building towered above the city. Here we begin in the next example with a subordinating conjunction, after the war, the building towered above the city. And finally, guarded by lesser structures, the building towered above the city. All three phrases begin with either an ing word, a subordinating conjunction, or an ed word. And here is a list of subordinating conjunctions that you might want to use in front of those phrases. Now let's add an external dependent clause to the beginning of the foundational clause. Wherever I went. Of course, this is a dependent clause because it has an actor and it has an action. Wherever I went, the building towered above the city. When external clauses appear before the foundational clause, they often begin with a subordinating conjunction. We already saw wherever I went, the building towered above the city. Another example, as we drew nearer, the building towered above the city. And the last example, whenever I looked, the building towered above the city. All three of these clauses begin with a subordinating conjunction. Be very careful though. Make sure whenever you do add external information onto a foundational clause, make sure that information is indeed a word, a phrase, or a dependent clause. We are not adding additional independent clauses yet. And no matter what you do, remember, you have to start with that foundation. You have to have that independent clause with that actor, that action, and of course, don't forget, it's nice to have an answer as well. As always, thanks for joining me, and I hope you will join me in Lesson 6 when we look at how to add external information to the end of a foundational clause. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.